Hi, this is Legends of Tabletop, and I'm Laird Barron, horror writer.
Thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy schedule to spend with me and talk with me about Blood Standard and any other projects that you may have in the pipeline for us. What would you care to share about Blood Standard and its critical reception?
Well, thank you for having me back. I really enjoyed our previous conversation, so it's really
Mhm.
nice to be back. And actually, I just got back from my latest trip to go promote the book. I was in Arizona and Texas, and then a couple weeks ago, I was New York City and then Providence, Rhode Island. And so it's been pretty, nothing major, but definitely. There was some traveling involved, and it's been received really well. I've gotten a lot. One of the things that I wondered about is how my existing fan base would receive the book. Because part of the idea was to branch out from kind of the micro genre that I've been working in. A subgenre of horror, which is cosmic horror,
Yes.
uh, and do something that's more traditional. And a much larger fan base. Crime has a huge uh, established fan base. It has a rich tradition, and a lot of people that won't read horror will read crime. That's one thing I have noticed when I say they're like, "Well, what do you write?" I'm like, "Oh, I'm writing crime novels." I get a lot less. Well, what does that even mean than I did if I say when I was writing when I was trying to talk about my short horror collections. You would have to go into a lot of description about exactly what it is that you do. So that's been kind of fun. It's not that I don't write horror anymore, but right now I'm writing crime, and so talking about it, I've noticed there's a big difference. It's a lot. There's a lot more a broader reception. People are more broadly receptive to it. But my current fan base has been really. There's a few people that are grumpy because I'm writing something different, but
Oh,
the overall reception has been really gratifying. It's really doing well.
absolutely. I mean, I see there are a lot of uh, tenants that follow through in the genre change, even though the title of the genre is different. There's still a great deal of suspense elements that are involved with crime, and I mean, I didn't have so much as a dark of a suspense issue with Blood Standard as some of your other items, but it was still there. Um, and do you find that there were many of the same tenants that followed you through this genre change?
Yeah, right. Actually, yes. I wrote an essay about it for what is it, Crime Reads, which is a newer. It's associated with Lit Reactor or Lit Hub, but basically, I talked about how noir, crime, and horror are essentially related in a lot of ways.
Mhm.
There's a big overlap, and a lot of my horror. I've been doing this for about 18 years, and I would say a great percentage of the stuff that I've written in the weird and horror genres also touch, crime and noir, and sometimes mystery or even thriller have always been sort of a bedrock. I'll start off with a mystery story, or I'll start off with sort of a quasi thriller, and then the horror kind of comes in later, the supernatural horror, I should say. The big difference with, I think, Blood Standard is really just that I strip out the supernatural component. It's still, and it's a little more accessible. With some of my short fiction, I'm not worried if somebody gets it. I'm not really, there's certain things you can do in a short story, especially if it's part of a broader collection, that you can take certain risks or defy audience expectations in a way that really won't affect the sales necessarily. You're already playing to a very small crowd, so either they're
Yeah,
with you or they're not with you.
yeah, and
So
those anthologies are themed as well, so you have that whole Venn diagram to draw upon.
yeah, and then do something crazy if you want to. So I would say that it's not that there aren't risks. There's always risk when you write for, because a lot of the people that I write for, they are commercial venues. Ellen Datlow doesn't do Baroque little niche anthologies. She does big old New York anthologies. But the point is, though, but even within the traditional confines of a genre, short fiction, you can get away with stuff because the risk, basically the stakes are a lot lower as far as the audience, maintaining an audience is concerned. But so Blood Standard is very much, it's very much me. It's just that it's me writing a more mainstream novel. It's there's certain rules that I get to play with, but there are traditions and conventions within the crime and mystery and war genres that I adhere to. And then the fun part of it for me though is to basically have that skeleton, but then take it in little subtle directions that might not be what people would expect.
Very, very true. Now, diving into, if we can talk about Isaiah Coleridge a little bit, I
Sure.
really appreciated the depth and the amount of work that you had put into building him. Now, do you have any preset guidelines, like for a character outline in general when you approach character making and character creation?
No, I don't.
Okay.
And I would say, and I know we're probably going to end up talking about Old Damon Knight because we were talking about him in the past. I'm sort of personally, this is from speaking for myself. I'm not about prescriptive advice. I think it has its place because some people really do function better uh, with with a rule set, right? I mean, that's just, we're all different. When I studied martial arts, I learned completely differently than almost anybody else in the dojo. And there were broad types. People have kind of fall into broad categories. Are you auditory? Are you kinesthetic? Do you require, are you a verbal learner? That type of thing. Are you tactile? And we each had even though we fit into broader archetypes, we each had our own different way of learning. And I feel like writing is that way too. Some people, I think, and maybe if I tried it more often than I have, maybe if I stuck to it for a while, maybe I would like to have a character, kind of like an archetypal character outline. I know other people do stuff like that. With me, though, with almost all of my writing, it's always intuitive. I write what sort of comes out of me. I dream about it. Like Coleridge didn't just happen overnight. I've been writing for many years, and he's sort of a synthesis of a lot of the tough guys, because that's one of the branches of writing that I do. I have the Barron tough guy story, and I've had my Yakuza enforcers, I've had Irish mobsters, I've had Pinkerton agents who might as well have been criminals the way they behaved. I've written about NSA agents. I've read about industrial spies, counter spies. You know, all of them have you could broadly say they all have similar jobs, but I found there's so many nuances between the characters. Even two leg breakers, like I said, I've written about the Irish mobster, and then you have Coleridge here, who's nothing to do with that, 1920s crowd, or the ethnicity or anything else. And yet they do the same job, and yet they have all these nuances that set them apart. And so what I did when I fashioned Coleridge is I decided to make it easy on myself. I could have written any character, but I wanted to write about a tough guy. I wanted to write kind of an archetypal, hard-boiled character. And he's the guy that showed up for the job. And what it turns out is he's sort of a synthesis. Like he's the best tough guy I know how to write at this point. I kind of take all these other guys that I have, and women. Old Jessica Mace is a tough woman.
Yes.
But the point is, all these, I don't even think of them in terms of gender. I kind of have a tendency to think of them like tough guy to me is like TG capitalized TM, like sort of a mindset.
Mm-hmm.
And so I've taken all these people in these related professions, and I said, what's the best at this point in my writing career? What is the best job I could do with taking the best parts of all these characters and doing something entertaining? Because that was also the thing, is I wanted the Coleridge novels to be quite serious and dark, but also you're kind of entertained by how the guy communicates with you. You smile a little bit, maybe grimly, but there's a little element of humor there as well, and kind of I don't want to say meta, but there's almost a meta element to some of the stuff going on with Coleridge.
There is. I mean, I can't help but call back to his. You almost pulled tricks there that echo of Zelazny with the mythological references that you make, because that immediately calls an image to mind for the readers that have been exposed to those things before.
Yes, that's a good point. And you know something? That's one thing that hasn't occurred to me because I'm a huge, as I've said many times. So I actually, a lot of my early fiction is memetics, that I didn't publish, like when I was a kid and a teenager. I actually had this one really great story, but it's too close to Zelazny. It would actually have to be a Zelazny parody. It's about 40,000 words long, and it's not even done. But I set it aside because I said, it's too close to Zelazny, and so but it taught me something. I learned how, kind of like in Finding Forrester, when the main character, old Forrester, tells the kid, "Just use me as your training wheels, then you move on from there." I kind of feel like there was some truth to that. I'm sure that was cribbed from some other author in the real world, telling some other author in the real world, "Hey, do this." But I hadn't thought of that in context of Coleridge. That totally makes sense. Because I think Zelazny is such a massive influence on me. It would be impossible for him not to be lurking in my subconscious when I'm working on stuff.
Yeah, I mean, and I mean, it's perfectly normal, because as we write, and I have not written that much at all, but I know that what I spit out is a combination of everything that I have taken in. So yeah. Oh, what else? Oh, yeah, structure. And exercise and completion, and beautifully simple examples of points set forth in a book that you had recommended to me. That's all I'm going to say about your use of structure in Blood Standard. So,
well, thank you.
It is beautiful. I mean, I gave you a much more eloquent message earlier today.
I really appreciate it. I got to tell you, writing, we go back to being accessible. Writing a commercial novel, and it's hard. It's really difficult. People mock things they don't like or the things they don't do. I think it's really easy I think it's really easy to try to put down commercial writing until you do it yourself. You attempt it yourself. It is very, very difficult to make something look, to flow really quickly, to not digress, because I love to digress. I like it when it's difficult. I like to basically go, I figure it out or don't figure it out. You really, to a large degree, that's not what you want to do especially with a crime novel. There can be mysteries. There can be things to think about later. I think that's wonderful, but you don't, the mystery shouldn't be confusing any more than, than it needs to be to the reader. And trying to craft basically trying to craft something that where you leave people wanting to go to the next chapter like immediately and find out what it is without it being repetitive. It's all very difficult. These are all these different strategies that I'm still learning. I've written the follow-up to this novel now, and I turned it in. So I felt like this novel taught me a lot, but even after finishing the second one, I said, I've got a ways to go before I really can even, even claim to say, okay, I'm kind of getting this figured out. I have many miles to go.
Okay, so you had just shared with us that you turned in the second one. Now, when could we, the public, expect to see this out?
I'm just speculating, but I would assume sometime, early to mid 2019 is my guess. So I have not received the actual date, but we've gone through 99% of the process for getting it ready. It's been copy edited. I've seen proofs, actual layout pages, and there could be some more stuff, but I would assume that it's going to be listed on Amazon the next month or two. So we'll know then.
Excellent, excellent. Now, working with a larger publication house versus an indie publication, what would you say the major differences are, drawing from your past experiences?
What's really, it's really interesting. It actually, working with Sarah Minnick, she's my book editor, and the publicists over there, and just the team in general, the GP Putnam team. And then to even go further, dive into this is I'm not just dealing with them, but they're owned by Penguin Random House, so I'm dealing with people from I assume from the broader, the bit larger company. It's been wonderful. But what it made me realize is that a lot of my fiction isn't uh, exclusively from indie presses. That I start thinking about going, yeah, Nightshade was actually a lot bigger, had a lot more presence in New York than I thought, and especially like my last book with them, The Beautiful Thing. Skyhorse had taken over, and Skyhorse did like $20 million the year before in sales. So they're not huge, but they're not a small press by any means. And so I
Okay.
realized I've actually had experience with decent sized presses. And then of course,
Okay.
Ellen Datlow, Tor books, Daw,
Yeah.
I mean, sometimes it's Solaris, sometimes it's these really nice independent houses, but was it Dark Horse, St. Martin's, big play Harper Collins. I was working with, I want to say it was Christopher Golden. So I actually, or Simon and Schuster. The point is, I realized that in the past, it was much smaller projects, my piece of it, but I had been working with these big houses all along. So I actually have had quite a bit of experience working with all the way from two people working on your book in a basement to 7 or 8 people on an average, a marketing team trying to decide where you should go for a book tour, not to mention all the people involved with the book itself. And my experience here has been one of my favorites I've ever had. You hear all these stories, and I assume that everybody's path through publishing being different, they would all have different experiences. So far, this is in my top 3 or 4 experiences I've ever had. I hesitate to say it's my favorite because I don't want to, insult anybody, but it's way up there. I have been treated really well, uh, very professionally, and I got to tell you, they've made a really strong effort to promote the book and to support me and the book, and I've enjoyed it. I feel like I've also feel like we're working with a big time editor who, big five editor on a commercial novel. I got free education in how to write this type of a book, which is, you go pay a lot of money at places at workshops to learn this. I know quite a bit. And so I was in a position to know just how little I know about this. So I'm pretty enthusiastic about, if nothing else, if we didn't do any more books, I feel like I really, not only did I benefit from obviously having these books out there, now people can read them, a much, much bigger audience than I've ever had so far, from what I can tell, by magnitudes. But I also am walking away with a lot more knowledge in a really interesting sense, not just how to do a commercial novel, but just how to write for a larger audience in general. Like I could take the knowledge that I've gained and go, no, I'm going to write this literary historical novel that's very dense and very, you basically pick your way through it and reread parts of it. I feel like my editor and her team have taught me how to probably be more successful if I ever do that. So,
Okay.
yeah, it's good.
Definitely. Oh gosh, what was I going to say? I loved how you pretty much, well, I don't want to lay out any spoilers, I guess,
Right.
if that would. So, man, I had this whole line of questions, and it's like, well, if I do ask them, then the spoiler, man. Going back and I'm looking at your structure, and I mean, again, there are some points that I want to ask, and again with the spoilers.
Right.
Speaking of spoilers, have you ever spoiled your morning coffee by not setting the coffee pot? Don't let that happen again. Don't let that happen again. Now, you can get your very own legendary brew from the Legends of Tabletop website. Just go up at the banner. Underneath the banner, you will see the section of legendary brew, and you can get your very own. Also from Birds of Feather Coffee Company, com. Or there's a brew for every birdie. Gather the flock and migrate on down to birdscoffeecompany.com. Again, that's birdscoffeecompany.com. And that was a brief word from our sponsors.
Very
Um,
nice.
so, um, what have you been consuming any mass media lately?
Well, actually, yes. But before I get to that, I was just going to say, we are talking about Roger Zelazny. It occurred to me,
Yes.
I've never read his, because he wrote some crime novels. I've never read those. He's one of my very favorite authors, and there's still a few books of his that I haven't read. He had a pretty productive, output, but he wrote some crime novels, and I haven't read those. But I have read a couple things by his son Trent. And I would suggest you go out there and check Trent Zelazny out. He's got a
Okay.
whole, I don't know all his novels, but he's got a whole slew of them. But I highly recommend him just in general. He was on a show on the Mike Davis Lovecraft Ezine podcast a couple years ago, I believe, and I was on there briefly, just a voice in the chorus. It was really neat talking to him. Trent is a really good guy, a really good writer, and he had these wonderful anecdotes about how his dad wrote In the Lonesome October. I think is the one that we were talking about, the Halloween
I
theme.
remember that.
Yeah, and it was really neat listening to his son talk about it. But so I just wanted to throw him out there. As far as mass stuff, I would highly recommend, or not mass, but like bigger publishing kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Uh, is now I have to say, he's a good friend of mine, but I think Stephen King agrees with me on this. So I would read Paul Tremblay's latest novel, The Cabin at the End of the World. I think
Yes.
that's a must read. The thing is that Paul has been a must read kind of guy, an essential, as far as I'm concerned. He's been an essential author for years, and he's finally getting his due. But I will say this especially to anybody who's like just hardcore into horror literature in general, you're only getting part of the story if you read these three big novels that horror novels that he's released. Head Full of Ghosts, Disappearance at Devil's Rock, and now Cabin at the End of the World. These are wonderful, but if you want the whole story, you need to go read In the Meantime, which is a collection by Paul, or Compositions for the Young and Old, or just start scrolling through some anthologies the last 10, 12 years. His short fiction could not be any more different. That was something interesting. He was actually one of my models for not necessarily how to succeed, but like I just felt like he was a great model for someone who had transitioned from really head scratching niche horror and weird fiction on the short fiction scale, kind of like postmodern stuff, very, very complex stuff, to not giving it all up and writing dumbed down commercial fiction, but actually like bridging this somewhat literary, but also really accessible, like somehow finding a way to fuse those together, and I think he's like a model of that, because he can write either way. He can write these unbelievably Borges-esque narratives on the short level, and he does the same thing. He mixes crime and horror and things like that, but you just get a completely different guy. I mean, you recognize him, but he wears a completely different hat when he writes feature length fiction. And I think it's just amazing. It's somebody that I look at what he's doing going, yeah, that's how you do this, because he does it in a way that doesn't compromise his artistic vision. I feel like he basically brings the antipodes together enough that he can get a much bigger audience. And
Okay.
I think it's very cool.
I think you've just completed my to-do list because I'm speaking with him in a couple of weeks.
Yeah, this newest one, I read it in manuscript, and so I have the hardcover sitting here, but I don't know if he made many changes. I think what I read was pretty much it had been edited, but it's brilliant. I mean, Paul's always brilliant, and that's like the big mass market thing. Another book that I've read. I was going to wave it in front of the camera. It's by somebody named Thomas Pluck, and he's actually we're friends on Facebook and whatnot. But it's a revenge crime novel, and it's by Down and Out Books, so it's not from one of the huge presses, but I really like it. I just finished that, and I started talking to people in New York, and when it's one of those deals where a lot of people know Thomas Pluck. He's basically, I think he's kind of in crime, like I've kind of been doing in horror. If you read a lot of crime, you know who Thomas Pluck is, kind of a thing. He may not be sitting on a stage with Connolly, but that's just through no fault of his own. I mean, he is a great writer. And another one, I'm trying to get a hold of it, but I want to read She Rides Shotgun by Jordan. I hear that's really good. He was working on they canceled it, but he was working on a pilot for LA Confidential that was going to be on CBS.
Wow.
So I just read that one. I think his name's Jordan Harper. I just read a little bit. You get on Amazon with the preview. It was like 10 pages, but it's scintillating, just absolutely, wonderful. So
Awesome. So, how many, if you don't mind me asking, how many more entries can we expect of Isaiah Coleridge in the series?
if all it all depends upon whether people want to read the book. So if enough people buy these two books, and we won't know until we see the numbers, but I'm going to be positive and say, yeah, we're going to do more of them. And the question I've been asked repeatedly would it be a series in perpetuity like Spencer? If you were, basically if the market bore 50 books, would you write 50 books? And the answer is no. It's very much a finite series. I'm not quite sure what the number would be. A dozen or fewer is kind of how I kind of think of it as, it's not quite a novel told in multiple parts, but it kind of is in some ways. It's I'm trying to construct it in such a way that you could pick it up pretty much anywhere in the series and enjoy it, but you would definitely get the full benefit if you read the whole thing. So what the structure basically is going to be is, there's an overarching story, but the main story in each book will be the mystery, the mystery of the week type of a thing. Is he looking for the girl in the first novel? The second novel, he's actually hunting a serial killer who everybody thought was dead, or had at least vanished. It would have to be very, very much a senior citizen and either dead or out of commission, who somehow seems to be active again. And then so each novel would basically have that kind of a mystery that's self-contained within the novel, and then there's there's going to be a developing plot. Basically, more and more is revealed about Coleridge and the wider world as the series goes on. But it's not something that I would want to see just go on in perpetuity. It's something, it's kind of like the mythological components, or the allusions to legendary creatures and people it's not an accident. I'm not trying to imply that it's going to delve into the supernatural explicitly, but just that I really like that narrative arc, the kind of the hyper masculine, kind of doomed. I would say Greek, almost like the Greek tragedy, but I'm not confining myself to Greek mythology. It's world mythology. There's Beowulf in there. There's maybe Gilgamesh is in there. There's many other cultures and sort of juxtapositions going on, but they all have the thing in common where it's this archetype of the violent masculine hero, or at least macho, if nothing else, and sort of how this pattern is kind of like kind of a descent into hell a lot of the time.
Excellent. I also appreciated I could see definitely some parallels between Athena and his canine as well.
Minerva, right?
Minerva, yeah.
Athena, she's old. She's not doing all that well. I don't know if we talked about her the last time. I think we might have. It's one of those deals. She's sleeping on the floor over here. She's almost 16, and she's a big dog. At her peak, she was about 80 pounds, all muscle. So she's like 60 pounds now. She's old. She can barely, she stumbles around and stuff. But I've been dealing with her getting old for a few years now, and then the last year and a half or so, she's been doing okay. But she had bouts of illness. I thought I was going to lose her, and it's no accident. I've written about dogs a lot the last 5 or 6 years. Coleridge is one example, but I have a series of stories about a dog named Rex. And Rex is kind of like Moorcock's eternal champion, the recurring champion, or the return, the basically eternal return. It's always Rex, but it could be a Chihuahua in the story. It might be a Saint Bernard in the next, but they're all Rex in spirit. And I've written a lot of. Matter of fact, when I was in Providence recently. I was there. I talked about Blood Standard, but because it was a Lovecraft uh, reading, I read a Lovecraftian story, and it was all about a guy, kind of Survivor's Guild, about a guy who lost his dog when he escaped escaped the clutches of a nefarious cult. And so I've been dealing with it. I've been dealing with her and, the ever encroaching loss of her for quite a while. I suppose it's my cheesy attempt to memorialize my dog in some ways. She's been a lot to me.
Oh, yeah, she's been through a lot with you.
Every story, but she's been under my desk, or like I said, even now, she doesn't go under the desk because she's just so kind of getting decrepit. But she's never. I can always reach out and find her, even now. And ever since, I've only done 2 stories. I've only written 2 stories professionally that she wasn't there for. And so all the rest. So she's been with me for almost 16 years.
Wow.
So it's I think she's earned her spot.
And I believe so too. But yeah, I appreciate how Isaiah Coleridge, his love for animals shines through as well, throughout the novel.
That's oh, go ahead. I'm sorry. I mean,
no, it's okay.
Oh, I was just going to say that it's really that's actually harder for me to write about, his love for animals. It's not hard to write about like actually the physical act of it or the emotional. Mm-hmm. No, it's harder for me to balance that with him because I want Coleridge. I mean, part of the problem is if I were writing a straight literary novel, there are certain things I would do with Coleridge that would be different. In other words, if I didn't care, if it wasn't, if it were something other than a commercial novel, Coleridge would probably be a few shades darker than he is. So, but on the other hand, I didn't want to sacrifice. In other words, I didn't want to write a character just for the sake of writing a commercial novel who is just, oh, he's a bad guy, but we all know he's not. He only goes after the guys who deserve it, so he's not really bad. To me, that's one of the big downfalls of popular anti-heroes, is that you find yourself rooting for them when it hasn't been, earned, type of thing. I mean, and so I need to balance that. And so one of the reasons that I have him enjoy, the company of animals and have a soft spot for him, I want it to be reasonable. Like it's not a spoiler to say that part of the reason that this novel kicks off the way it does is because he interrupts. I mean, it's on the jacket copy. There's a walrus slaughter, and he's not down with it, and he reacts violently, and he puts a stop to it using his skill set. But the reason I did it though it's kind of elided in the novel, but my justification for it, or my rationalization, had less to do with this will make him sympathetic. Although I think it does. I think having him at least like animals is sort of a necessary element to have him be at least remotely sympathetic. Like it's okay if he's down on people, but he has to like something. What is it? A kid that he likes? Does he like dogs? What is it? You have to give him something that other people can relate to. Otherwise, what are you doing? It's a literary novel.
Yeah.
It's a character. It's a character study only. No, but part of the reason that he reacted so violently to the walrus slaughter, because he likes to eat meat. He would probably put Minerva in harm's way if he had to. He's very pragmatic. It's just that there's this idea that in our culture we glorify conspicuous consumption. And I don't think this is like something that necessarily he would be on a higher level thinking about, but I think internalizing this. I mean, the guy's not a dummy. He's a college educated man. And I think the idea that the Golden Arches, for example, are kind of almost like an altar for us in a lot of Americans in a way. We have eating I mean, other parts of the world are starving, and we're celebrating an eating contest, right?
Glorifying our gluttony.
Yeah, absolutely. We're not satisfied just to be gluttonous. We have to give you a prize if you're really gluttonous. And I think the conspicuous consumption aspect, the slaughter, basically when it intersects violence, when it intersects brutality, it was too much for him. I think that was a contradiction that was just a little bit too far. It's one thing to go put other mafiosos into the ground. They know the rules. You're all playing on the same rule set. We don't have any deal with them. We kind of have a stewardship pact with animals, whether you're religious or not. We all are kind of, on some level, we've been taught that we're stewards of the environment. We're stewards of the natural creatures that dwell within the environment. And you don't have to be a hippie or a bleeding heart to, on some level, sort of internalize the fact that, well, even if it's for mercenary reasons, we should husband our resources to some. We don't squander resources. I mean, the Native Americans, they killed buffalo left and right, but they
Yeah,
had this
but
attitude: you use every part, right?
yeah,
It's not wanton. And I think the wantonness of the brutality was too much for him, because he even says it. He goes, he doesn't kill people because it's fun. He does it because it's sort of like, once you start, you're with the mafia, you're not with the mafia, and if you're not with the mafia, you're dead, or in his case, lucky enough to be exiled. But also, um, he wasn't doing it for the joy of it. He was doing it because it's a job, and one that he happens to be particularly good at. Everybody's good at something, and he found out that he's very good at pressure situations. So this was just something. It had less to do with, in other words, it had far less to do with, oh, these poor fuzzy creatures are being hurt. It struck a much deeper. There's something much deeper, more primordial going on with him. There was like just something inherently wrong, and he kind of explores that in both the books that I've turned in. That that's still going on. The aftershocks of that are still going on in book 2. It's not as directly referenced, but that's one thing about the series, is a lot of series are very episodic. I've read Spencer and love Spencer, and sometimes Spencer will talk about, oh, this case that happened a while back. But Spencer, doesn't really bear the scars in the same way that a regular person would. Coleridge bears the scars. You're going to see, if this book goes, let's say if the series goes 10, Coleridge will be a different person physically and mentally at book 10 than he was in book 1.
Well, hell, with as much bruising and battering that he gets along the way, I can't understand how someone could have that supernatural ability to heal completely.
Well, that it would never catch up with you. See, this is the one of the themes in Coleridge is, well, I've actually experienced in my own life, not to the degree that he is, but like, I've been hurt severely, probably worse in some ways than is described with him in the book. I've been run over by a tree, logs rolled over me. I've been stomped by moose. I've had all kinds of bad things where I thought I was fine, beaten up for a few weeks, like literally limping around with a disc bulging in my back like this.
Oh,
but you don't know how bad it is until years later. Like, now I'm suffering. Now I mean, I am half who I was 20 years ago. And I'm going to, a lot of things seem to bounce off Coleridge in book 1. Book 2, the bounces aren't quite so bouncy. And if there's a 3, 4, 5 and onward, there's going to come a point where, and this is something I'm excited to explore. It's like, Coleridge is not, it's the idea that everything catches you sooner or later. His past catches up to him in more ways than one. And that's something that I'm kind of excited about doing a series like this.
I'm excited to read it. And that's a definite. It was a fast-paced read for me. And I think I devoured it in 5-6 hours.
Wow.
So, I mean, it was an excellent read, and thank you for entertaining me.
Thank you so much for telling me that. I've actually gotten quite a bit of feedback that people read it, in a couple sittings or 3, in other words, they read it over a weekend easily. And that was the idea. It's not a short book. It's not huge, but it's over 80,000 words. I mean, it's a regular sized book, but, and this, I've never tried this before. I mean, you've read my short fiction. A lot of my short fiction is like 30,000 words and there's 4 paragraphs. I mean, it's very dense. And you have to go back and read stuff and things like that. I really set out to make this, I hoped, something that you would want to keep reading. You read 5 chapters because they're short. The chapters are very, very short. And I was hoping that it would pull people along. And so far, a lot of people have said that. They've said, if nothing else, they've said, man, I burned through it. And so I said, all right, I did it. I succeeded in that regard. Excellent.
Yes, she did. It is a page turner. If I'm just going to say that to anyone watching, if you have not gotten it yet, get it.
Thank you.
Yes, please do. So, so the book tour, tell me about the book tour.
Well, pardon me, I've got my allergies. For anybody that tuning in, I'm in the mid Hudson, upper Hudson Valley of New York State. The Catskills are just north of me, about 10 miles, actually. So I'm in a little farming community, and where we're living, there's huge sycamore trees all around the property, and I'm very allergic to them. I love them, but I'm allergic to them. So I'm sitting here this whole time we're talking, and my throat's killing me. But the tour was great. I'm very lucky to get one, especially as a first time. Obviously, I'm not a first time author, but I may as well be for New York Publishing. And so it was a lot of confidence on their part and a lot of support to send me out. And so I went to the Poison Pen in Arizona, which was, all of them were awesome. So I went to the Poison Pen, and I spoke with Robin Bursell, who has been co-writing with Clive Cussler on one of his series. And so she interviewed me. That seems to be kind of the format, actually, with the bookstores now. Sometimes you read, but other times you do kind of like you talk with the audience, or you talk with the host and you talk with the audience. That was a lot of fun. And then I went to Book People in Austin, and that was a blast. And then the third place I went to when they sent me on the tour was in Houston, and I went to Murder by the Book, and that was a lot of fun. And then in New York City, I was at I signed a bunch of books and talked to people at the Mysterious Bookshop. And so those were the main places that I went. And then I went to Providence. I'm going back to New York City at the end of this month. We're going to read it, McNally Jackson, with the aforementioned Paul Tremblay.
Mm-hmm.
I believe Nadia Bolkin, Livia Llewellyn, and John Langan. I think that's everybody.
Awesome.
And a couple of weeks ago, it was Michael Sisko, John Langan, and I were at the Lovecraft Science Council bookstore. So it was a blast. It was really hot. It was like about 100 degrees everywhere, but they put me up in really nice hotels, and they actually had cars take me places. It was nice. It was a lot of fun, and I've done tons and tons of bookstore readings over the years, but usually as part of a group, type of a thing. This was kind of my first experience. I mean, locally, John Langan and I have read at Inquiring. There's this really wonderful bookstore called Inquiring Minds in Saugerties and New Paltz. And so we've headlined that, but this was my first time going like on a major trip where it was just me, me or me and a host. And it was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun. It was my first commercial book, so I had a lot of books to sign, stock that they had. All the bookstores had tons, like boxes and boxes of Blood Standard. I gotta tell you, as somebody who's even with Skyhorse is just used to, if you go to a bookstore, you sign a dozen books or something. This is a whole different level.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And a lot of I will say this before I forget, a lot of my fans turned up at each one of these things, and my fellow authors. And I super appreciated. I'm not even going to name anybody because I would forget people, but I will just say some of those guys are going to watch the show. I just really appreciate them coming and supporting me. And I really appreciate my fans who came. Like, and when I was in Houston, fans had come from like New Orleans to come see me. They'd driven all day to come to the show. So that means a lot. I mean, you got to get paid so you can keep doing it. But part of the reason you do it, I think a big reason for me is just that when people love your stuff enough, or your stuff means enough to them, that they'll drive. Because they had all my stuff, they brought a couple boxes of everything that I'd ever done. I signed it. It's hard to put that into words, but it really is. It justifies a lot of the grind of writing. Because writing is not, as writing is lonely a lot of the times. And it's certainly not a lot of fun. But that really does. You forget all those hours you put in. Because I looked at all those books. I'm going, man, that's thousands and thousands and thousands of hours of my life. There are vacations. There are ex-girlfriends and wives in that pile of books, and dead dogs, and I mean, you name it. Just a lot of lost history because you're hunched over a keyboard doing that. It's really nice that it meant something to somebody else.
That's got to be I can only imagine that it would be a very humbling experience. And I mean, even with this podcast, like when I went to Necronomicon the last time, I was approached by fans, and I mean, gotta love you guys. So
It's wonderful though, because it means something to them.
yeah,
Because
yeah.
we're talking about, there's one level where people buy your book and you're really grateful for that. And they may have said, "Hell, you gave me a few hours. I got my 5 hours, so yay." And that's wonderful. I wouldn't have a writing career if not for everybody doing that. It's just that there are some people where your work, you're not just one of a bunch of authors they like, but you're like one of their very favorite writers, or some of your work really got them through a bad time or something.
Yeah.
I have to say that's the part of my career so far that really is becoming like maybe my favorite part of my career. And that is somebody will email me or write me a letter or send me something and say, yeah, I got divorced a couple years ago and I didn't know what was going to happen. And I was reading Occultation, which is sort of the relationship horror and all or collection. And it was it was so nice to have these people having way worse problems than I was to basically follow. Or something bad happened and I was in a hotel or motel in the desert and I was reading Occultation, which takes place in a motel in the desert, and I was like, that's like one of my favorite stories now, type of thing. And it means a lot. It really does. I've gotten kids, kids or teenagers are starting to email me and say, "You're the first horror novelist I've ever read," or what, my dad told me I should read you, or something like that. Or usually my evil uncle said you should read this guy. Don't tell anybody. But that's become my favorite part of, I think, emotionally, spiritually, that's become sort of like the big payoff for me. Besides just getting money to survive, the actual payoff is that you affect people in a meaningful way. And I've been around long enough. I'm starting to see that. I got to tell you, it makes a lot of this really worth it.
Absolutely, it does. Man. Now, before we depart, is there anything else that you would like to add? Is there anything that you wish I would have asked you about?
No, I'm not off the top of my head. Because some of the things I would have been interested to find out is plot points, but we can't talk about those because it'll give away the. So all I would just say is, and you got me talking about. To me, I was able to mention a few writers that I'm reading and people that I really admire, but also, I like to be able just to say this whole experience the last couple of years is really going out on the road and stuff is just, I always knew I had fans, but it's just nice. I mean, like I said, people coming from across state lines to come see me. I just realized, and it was very low key. It's not, this is not Neil Gaiman level, nothing like that. But it's really was heartwarming. And so I'm glad that I was able to talk about that, talk about my dog. The only thing I would say just is, I have another, go out and get this one if you like it. There's another one. It's called Black Mountain, and it's coming out next year. And I'm working
Good old
on.
Rex.
What's that?
I said, good old Rex.
Oh, right. Well, and actually, I'm working on a handful of actual horror stories for various editors. I'm in between novels. I'm getting ready to start another novel. I've actually got it sketched out, and I've got another Coleridge novel sketched out, and I have a horror novel. I've got tons of ideas for both of them, but I have those two novels sketched out, and depending on what happens, I'll be working on one or the other here real soon. But I'm working on a bunch of various lengths of short fiction. I'm working on a novella, some novelettes, and then some shorter pieces that are all in the weird. That hopefully, if they make it, they've all been solicited. So if they make it, you'll be seeing. They didn't have much out last year or this year, but hopefully next year you'll see. In the next year, you'll see like 7 or 8 more stories.
Excellent. Will this be through any specific publisher that we should keep an eye out for, or will this be in various anthologies that you have been solicited? Okay.
Right. So I can't, for multiple reasons, I can't say. Some of them
Understood.
will be advertising, if they buy my stuff. But, I never want to presume. I will say I have enough material already to do at least one more collection. I have if I were to drop dead at the keyboard, John Langan or somebody could scrape everything together and I'd have another pretty long collection. So this is all stuff that nobody's seen. So hopefully,
Okay.
and hopefully there'll be a new collection in a couple of years. I've had, the reason I'm bringing it up is it actually has been asked quite a bit lately. Like, well, it's been a couple of years. You got another one next year. I'm like, no, the earliest would be 2020, but when it comes, there'll probably be 2 of them coming or one gigantic one. So we'll see. By the time 2020 comes, I would probably have, I'm guessing I'll have almost 250,000 words that I could put into short fiction, which would be, I would never do that in one book, but if I did, it would be a Stephen King. It'd
Yes.
be The Shining, basically.
Yeah. And speaking of King and the genre swap that you have done, it seems that there's a little bit of a trailing along there.
Well, everybody's trailing along Stephen King, but yeah. Although the thing is, he's done it. He did it with the Colorado Kid, he did it with Joyland. He's way farther back. I mean, different seasons is actually, with the exception of the breathing method, which I guess could be supernatural. He's been spreading his wings for years. I mean, he felt confined, not by writing horror or supernatural horror, but by being designated as this is all you can do. And I think he set out to prove everybody wrong with the Bachman.
Yeah.
Like with the Bachman books, right? I mean, so he's always been messing with that. I will say though that I wasn't consciously emulating King. It had more to do, although it's perfectly fine, right? But it had more to do with, wanting to just, that I grew up reading Hammett and John D. McDonald and then the Westerns like Max Brand, all this stuff, Parker. And I just said, I want to do one of those. Maybe do a few of those. I would love to write a traditional, do my own thing with it, but write some traditional crime or thriller or mysteries. I'm a big Martin Cruz Smith fan, so I really would love to try my hand at doing, and maybe Coleridge kind of in the second book. It kind of flirts with that thriller, sort of the high concept thriller. But the point is it had more to do with me going, I sure would like to do my Martin Cruz Smith novel someday, or my Robert B. Parker novel.
Understood. Now, I'm just very tempted to end the interview so I can talk plot points with you.
Okay.
and I feel terrible for my personal desire to do so, but I know that you may have a time constraint as well, and I don't know if you do or if you do not.
No, I don't have a time constraint. I'm fine.
Okay.
I budget when I do an interview. I budget a couple hours, because I figure sometimes I ramble. So there you go.
No, you haven't rambled at all. As a matter of fact, I must admit that the interviews that I've had with not only you, but with other authors, it's been a learning experience for me as well. Not only for those listening, but for me, I'm paying attention to what the words that you say.
Oh,
and,
good.
Yeah, and thank you again for taking the time just to speak with me and all of us here at Legends of Tabletop, which would be two other people that aren't here. But
It's my honor to come on.
Thank you very much, Laird.